Every soldier in that hall was on their feet. Not one of them had been ordered to stand. 500 of them. Trays lifted off the tables, held in the air like an offering nobody remembered picking up. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. A drink poured and never finished, the pitcher still tilted. The steam off 200 plates rising into a silence so complete you could hear the ice machine cycle in the back and the big HVAC fans turn over on the roof. Thursday, 12:40 in the afternoon. A garrison dining facility that had been a solid wall of noise 90 seconds ago and was now a photograph of itself. At a table near the salad line stood a 19-year-old private named Brody Keegan. He had a fork in his fist and a piece of chicken on it, and he could not, for the life of him, make his arm come down. His knuckles were white around the handle. His face had gone the gray of the tray in his other hand. He was staring across the room at a woman he had watched eat alone for 3 days straight, and he was beginning to understand. Slowly, the way a man understands he has stepped off a roof, that he had made the worst mistake of his short career, and that every single person in the room already knew it, and that he was the last to find out. 72 hours earlier, none of them knew her name. Rewind. Monday, 12:15. The lunch rush at full roar, the way a chow hall roars when 800 soldiers get 45 minutes and mean to use every one of them. Trays clattering onto rails, boots squeaking on wet tile, the short order line calling numbers over the din, a card reader beeping somewhere and beeping again, the smell of institutional gravy and floor cleaner and coffee that had been on the burner too long. She came through all of it like weather, a plainly dressed woman in civilian travel clothes. Dark jacket, dark shirt, no bag, no badge, nothing on her anywhere that said soldier. Middle 40s maybe. Hair pulled back off a face that gave away nothing at all. She carried a loaded tray in both hands and looked for an open table the way a person looks when they have eaten in 1,000 rooms exactly like this one, in a dozen countries, and expect nothing from any of them but a chair and a wall to put their back to. Brody Keegan saw an easy afternoon. He had 3 privates at his table, and an audience is a dangerous thing to hand a 19-year-old. He caught his buddy's eyes. He tipped his chin at the woman crossing the aisle. He grinned before he'd even done anything, which is the tell of a boy who has decided to be funny at someone else's cost. And as she came level with him, he slid his boot out into the lane. The tray hit the deck. It was a clean hit from where he sat. The whole plate of it, mashed potatoes, a chicken breast, green beans, a carton of milk that split its seam and ran a white river across the tile. A tray on a hard floor is a loud thing. Heads turned all down the line. And into that turning, Keegan delivered his line, pitched to carry to the tables around him, pleased with it before the last word cleared his teeth. "Wrong chow hall, ma'am. Civilians eat off post." His table laughed. Of course they laughed. 2 of them laughed because it was funny, and 1 of them laughed because the other 2 did. The woman did not. She looked down at the ruin spread across the floor. Then she looked at him. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Not anything he had a name for. She looked at him the way you look at a weather report, noting it, filing it, deciding what it changes about your afternoon. And she said 3 words, flat and level, in a voice with a stillness under it that a smarter man would have heard as a warning. "Clean that up." Then she crouched, unhurried, and set the tray upright. She stacked the split carton on it so the milk wouldn't spread further. She squared the tray's edge to the seam in the tile with 2 fingers, a small, exact, unnecessary motion, the habit of a person who squares everything she touches. And while her hands worked, her eyes went once around the room. The main doors, the serving line, the kitchen pass, the side exit by the drink station, around and back. It took a second and a half, and there was no fear in it at all. She wasn't looking for a way out. She was counting the room the way she counted everything, out of a habit 20 years deep. 2 tables over, a gray-haired sergeant major named Isaiah Redmond stopped chewing. Keegan wasn't finished. He was never finished. That was the whole trouble with him. "I'm serious," he said, playing to the table, warming to it. "You lost? Dependent housing's that way." He pointed with his fork, out the window, toward the family quarters, and his buddies snorted. She stood. She did not answer him. She left the mess on the floor for whoever he'd send to clean it, walked back to the serving line, drew a fresh tray, waited her turn behind 2 cooks and a chaplain like anybody, and carried her food to an empty table in the far corner. She sat with her back to the wall. She began, calmly, to eat. Across the room, the gray-haired man was staring at her like a man who has just seen a ghost walk in and order the chicken. She ate a little more than half of it. She drank the coffee cold. She left without once looking at Keegan's table again, and the private told the story twice more before she was through the doors, each telling a little bigger than the last. Redmond didn't tell it at all. He sat with his fork down and his food going cold in front of him, and he watched the door for a long time after it had swung shut. Tuesday. Same room. Same hour. She was back. Same corner. Same wall. Same stillness. And this time, the room paid for its comfort. It was a soldier, 4 seats down the long table from her. 1 second, he was laughing at something, mouth full. The next, he wasn't making any sound at all. Both hands flew to his throat. His eyes went wide and white, the specific silent horror of a full airway. No cough, no wheeze, nothing. Just a man drowning in open air with 100 people around him. His buddy pounded him on the back, and it did nothing. A staff sergeant down the way lurched up and knocked his own chair over backward. The woman was already there. Nobody saw her cross the distance. She was simply behind him, and her hands were moving with a terrible economy. No wasted motion, no panic anywhere in them. 4 sharp blows with the heel of her hand, high between the shoulder blades, angled down. Nothing came. She stepped in, wrapped him from behind, found the soft place below the sternum with the edge of her fist, cupped it with her other hand, and drove up and in. Once. Twice. On the 3rd thrust, a knot of meat shot out onto the table, and the soldier hauled in a breath, like a man surfacing from 30 feet of water. She had counted the whole time. Under her breath. A low, even count, the cadence of someone who had done exactly this before, more than once, in worse rooms than this one, with less light and more blood. "Breathe," she told him, one flat hand between his shoulder blades. "You're fine. In through your nose." Slow. He nodded, gasping, tears cutting down a red face. She checked that the airway was clear, felt his pulse at the jaw with 2 fingers, and only then straightened. And for 1/2 of 1 second, the mask slipped, and something came up out of her in a voice built for a much larger room, a voice that had spent years being obeyed, the instant it spoke. "As you were." And here was the strange part, the part Redmond would turn over all night. The tables around her sat back down, not because anyone told them to. A woman in civilian travel clothes said 2 words, and 40 grown soldiers' bodies answered before their minds had caught up to the fact that a civilian had no business giving that order in that tone. She went back to her corner, back to her cold coffee, as if nothing had happened, because to her, measured against the rooms she'd worked, nothing much had. Redmond had watched all of it, the count, the economy. He had watched her left wrist especially, the way she kept it turned inward, the way a person keeps a wrist turned when there's ink there they aren't advertising to strangers. He had watched a woman spend motion the way a veteran spends it, like it costs money, like there might not be enough of it to waste. He had seen exactly 1 human being move like that in his entire life, 21 years ago, in a far worse place than this. Some things a man never files away wrong. He had been a boot then. 19, the age Keegan was now, riding third vehicle on a road nobody had told them the truth about. He had not been brave that day. He had been terrified, flat on the deck behind an engine block, and the only reason he was alive to sit in this chow hall 21 years later and eat a plate of dry chicken was that a sergeant he had never met before that morning had walked forward through the fire he was hiding from and built order out of chaos and made a place where the wounded could be kept alive. He had watched her carry a man the length of 8 football fields on her back. He had never learned to walk right past that. You do not. Once you have seen it, it marks the inside of you. And here she was, eating alone in a corner, letting a child trip her tray. Because that was exactly the kind of thing she would do. Sit in a room full of people who did not know her and let them show her precisely who they were before she ever showed them one thing about herself. Redmond pushed his tray back, no longer hungry, and reached for his phone. By Tuesday afternoon, the joke had a name, and the name had a life of its own. Somebody had taken a photo Monday, the tray on the floor, the woman crouched over the spill, and by 1500 it was in the platoon group chat, under a caption Keegan was proud of. Chow Hall Karen. It got the laughs that group chats give, the cheap, reflexive kind. It traveled. By evening, privates 2 companies over knew the bit without knowing the woman, which is the way of these things. The story outruns the person until the person is just a prop in it. Keegan held court all the next day. He was funny about it, in fairness. He had the whole arc down. The boot, the tray, the line, her 3 flat words. And he told it with his hands. And every telling he was a little braver, and she was a little more ridiculous, and the room a little more on his side. Wednesday she came back. Corner table. Same stillness. And Keegan, who could not leave a good thing alone to save his life, decided the bit needed a sequel. He got up for coffee when she did. He timed it so their paths would cross at the urns. And there he bumped her, hard enough to be a bump, soft enough to be deniable, and narrated it over his shoulder to his audience as it happened. Whoa. Easy, ma'am. Crowded in here. Coffee slopped over the back of her hand. It was hot. The urns ran hot. She didn't flinch at that either. She set the cup down on the steel counter, squared it to the edge with 2 fingers, reached for a napkin, blotted her hand, and said absolutely nothing at all. Her silence was worse than anything she could have said, and some animal part of Keegan knew it, and he papered over the knowing with a bigger laugh. At Keegan's table, a specialist named Mateo Quill was not laughing. Quill was 21, quiet, from a small town nobody had heard of, and he had been watching the woman for 2 days now, with a feeling in his gut he couldn't put a word to. When she'd been jostled into a napkin dispenser and knocked it crooked, it had been Quill who reached over and set it straight, and did not meet Keegan's eyes while he did it. Small things. Nobody noticed them. She noticed. She noticed everything in that room. That was the one thing about her that should have frightened them all if they'd been paying attention. I could end her whole day, Keegan told the table, tipping his chair back on 2 legs. 1 phone call to the desk. Unauthorized civilian, won't ID herself. They'd walk her off post in cuffs. He said it the way a boy describes a trick he's sure he can do. Quill's jaw went tight. He said it low, so only the table heard. Maybe just leave it, man. Keegan laughed at him too, and the chair legs came back down with a crack. Here's a thing worth sitting with before we go on. How easy it is. How cheap contempt is once you've decided that someone doesn't count. Keegan never asked her name, never wondered about her for 1 second. He looked at plain clothes and a still face and a quiet manner, and he filled in all the rest with nothing at all. And then he built 3 days of theater on top of the nothing and invited a whole battalion to watch. If that costs you something to sit through, sit with it. And subscribe to Honor Tales, because on this channel, the quiet ones always eat last, and you are going to want to see exactly who eats last here. Keegan, it turned out, meant the phone call. Wednesday evening, he found a duty NCO and reported it, more or less the way he'd bragged he would. An unidentified female in the dining facility, possibly a contractor, refusing to identify herself when asked. Harassing soldiers, he said, which was a beautiful and perfect inversion, given exactly who had tripped whom. But paper does not know the difference between a truth and its mirror. It went into the staff duty log in dry block capitals. Unidentified female, possible civilian contractor, uncooperative, advised of dining facility access policy, monitor and report. On paper, her position had just gotten worse. That is always how these stories turn before they turn. The truth face down on the floor, the lie standing up in ink. Thursday morning, before the lunch, she would never quite get to eat. A gate desk sergeant caught up with her on the walkway between the transient quarters and the headquarters building and asked her, politely enough, for identification. She stopped. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and produced a common access card and held it out to him face down, which is a small, strange thing to do, and the sergeant turned it over to read it. He read it. He read it again. And his whole posture changed between the first read and the second. The exact change that comes over a man when the floor tilts a few degrees under his boots. He came a half-inch straighter. He handed the card back too quickly, and a formality dropped into his voice that had not been there 10 seconds before. "Ma'am?" "My apologies for the interruption, ma'am. Have a good morning, ma'am." He did not ask her another thing. She took the card back and slid it into the inside of her jacket and pressed it flat against the lining with 2 fingers, squared to the seam. The sergeant never saw the front of it from where anyone else was standing, and neither did the 2 soldiers passing. But he turned on his heel and went straight back to the desk and made a second phone call, and it was not to the security office. It was to the brigade sergeant major's office, and he kept his voice down the whole time he made it, and he said, "Yes," 3 times and understood. Once. 2 buildings away, Isaiah Redmond had not let it go. He had spent Tuesday night and half of Wednesday arguing with a memory. Now he sat alone at his kitchen table with his phone in both hands and thumbed back through 21 years of photographs, through birthdays and duty stations and 2 divorces and a daughter's graduation, to a folder he did not open on purpose, ever, and found the one image he was after. A cracked, sun-blown photograph. A supply route in a country he had spent the better part of 2 decades trying not to think about. A wrecked vehicle canted in a ditch, and behind it, a casualty collection point that somebody had built in the open, under fire, out of nothing but will. And kneeling in the center of it, a young sergeant with blood on both sleeves that was not her own, a radio handset pinned against her shoulder with her jaw, one hand pressed flat on a wounded man's chest. 23 years old, running the worst afternoon of a dozen men's lives, like she had been born to run exactly that and nothing else. He zoomed in, past the face to the forearm. There was ink on the inside of her left wrist, a date, a short row of initials, a squad's private shorthand. The very same wrist the woman in the chow hall kept turning inward against her body, like a habit she'd stopped noticing she had. Redmond sat still for a long moment, with the phone going dark in his hands. Then he got up, and he went to find Keegan, and he did not go to threaten him. He went to warn him. He found the private in the smoke pit behind the barracks, holding court as always, 3 privates around him. Redmond waited until the audience thinned and drifted, and then he stepped in close, and he kept his voice low and level, the way you speak to a man standing nearer a ledge than he knows. "Son, whatever you think you saw at lunch, walk it back. Today. Not tomorrow. Today. before evening chow. Keegan grinned, because he grinned at everything, because grinning had always worked. "Sergeant Major, respectfully, she's a civilian." "You keep saying that." Redmond did not grin back, and the not grinning was its own kind of alarm. "If she is who I think she is, son, you want to be invisible to her? You want her to have never once known your name. And you are doing the exact opposite of that, at the top of your lungs, in front of the entire battalion." "So, who do you think she is?" Redmond looked at him for a second, like he might actually say it out loud. Then he shook his head slowly. "Because there are some things you do not hand to a fool, because a fool will only find a way to break them. Keep telling yourself she's nobody," he said, and turned to go. "Some of us don't have the luxury, and here is where the whole thing sits, poised. A sergeant major with 21 hard years behind him, gone pale over a woman eating alone in a chow hall. A 19-year-old too pleased with the sound of his own story to hear a warning delivered straight to his face. You already know she is not nobody. Stay with it and subscribe, because the moment this room learns what it has done, you are going to want to be watching Brody Keegan's face when it happens." Keegan laughed it off to his friends inside of 5 minutes. But that night, for the first time all week, he lay awake in his bunk a while, staring at the springs above him. She spent that same evening alone, in transient quarters, unpacking a duffel bag, and the story the whole base did not know unpacked itself with it. She laid a uniform out on the bed, not the civilian clothes, a pressed Army service uniform, and on the shoulder, the rank insignia of a command sergeant major, the highest rung an enlisted soldier climbs, the senior enlisted advisor to a full colonel, the single voice for the welfare and discipline of every soldier in a brigade. On the chest, a rack of ribbons 3 fingers deep, and crowning it, in the place of highest honor, the pale blue and white of a silver star. She hung it on the closet door. She folded the civilian jacket away, slow, and set it in the drawer. The costume, it turned out, was always the plain clothes, worn by a woman who had learned a long time ago exactly how much people will tell you about themselves when they are sure you are no one worth performing for. She sat on the edge of the bed. She turned her left wrist over and looked at the ink there. A date in the summer of 2005, and 4 sets of initials, and a 5th she touched once with the pad of her thumb. 2005. She was 23 years old. Sergeant Delia Marchetti, a squad leader, military police, riding a supply route that every intelligence brief had called cold, and that had not been cold at all. The blast came first, a culvert, a wire nobody caught. A vehicle lifted whole off the road and dropped, and then the tree line opened up, a long, ragged line of muzzle flash from good cover, and the convoy cut clean in 2, the front half pinned in the open, and the radio filling up with the sound of men shouting for help. She took the fight forward. That was the part nobody who had not been there ever quite believed when they heard it later. She did not go to ground behind her vehicle and wait for the air to sort it out. She moved up the pinned line under fire, vehicle to vehicle, calling positions, and she built a casualty collection point in the open behind the wreck, because there was nowhere on God's earth else to build one. And then she ran it. She counted. She counted the way she still counts today. Tourniquets high and tight, pressure held. Who could walk, and who had to be carried, and who was already past carrying. She put rounds down range with one hand, and held a young man's femoral artery closed with the other, and she never once stopped counting. There was a driver pinned in the lead vehicle, bleeding out 800 meters back, down an exposed stretch of road, with no cover on either side. She went and got him. She got a fireman's carry under him, and she brought him the whole 800 meters back on her own back, and she counted every single step out loud as she went, because the counting was the one thing keeping her boots moving forward through a place her body very much wanted to leave. 1, 2, 3, 800 of them. She has not, in 21 years, ever fully stopped counting. She saved 11 men that afternoon. The record says so in the dry, flat language records use. Organized the casualty collection point under sustained direct fire. Personally evacuated a critically wounded soldier, a distance of 800 meters across exposed terrain. Directed suppressive fire that allowed the disabled element to consolidate. Words on a citation. They do not carry the weight of the thing. They do not carry the sound of it, or the heat off the road, or the count she kept out loud the whole way, or the way her arms shook for 2 days afterward so badly she could not hold a coffee cup steady, and hit it, and squared everything she touched so that no one would see the shaking in her hands. That is where the habit was born. Right there, on that road. A young sergeant who could not stop her hands from trembling learned to press 2 fingers flat against the edge of a thing and make it still, and make herself still with it. And she had done it 10,000 times since, in 10,000 rooms, and had long ago stopped knowing she did it at all. The private who tripped her tray had watched her square it on the floor and seen a tidy woman. He had been looking straight at the deepest thing about her and seen nothing, because he had already decided there was nothing there to see. She did not save Corporal Shane Delacroix. Delacroix was 22 years old. He held the far vehicle, the most exposed one, the one whose fire let everyone else move, and he held it well past the point where holding it made any sense at all, because she needed the others to move, and he understood that better than anyone. And so he stayed, and he did not come back. They handed her his coin afterward, a worn brigade challenge coin he had carried in his left breast pocket since the day he finished basic training. She has carried it every single day since, in the same pocket where she keeps her own. She set Delacroix's coin on the nightstand now. She squared it to the edge of the wood with 2 fingers, and she reached over and turned out the light. The base did not know 1 word of any of this. The base knew a quiet woman in plain clothes who had let a private trip her tray and not made a scene. That was the gap. That gap was the entire engine of everything about to happen. And the base had exactly 1 more day to close it on its own decent terms, or to have it closed for them, all at once, in front of everybody. Thursday. Keegan needed to save face. Redmond had spooked him, and a spooked 19-year-old with an audience is a far more dangerous animal than a brave one. He had spent the whole morning being told by his own gut to leave it alone, and being wholly unable to, because backing down in front of the platoon felt worse to him than anything a sergeant major could threaten. So when he saw her come into the dining facility at midday, still in civilian clothes, one last lunch before she in-processed and drew the uniform and became visible to the whole world, he decided that he would prove, once and finally, in front of everyone, that she did not belong there. He crossed the room to do it. That was the detail he would replay for the rest of his life, at 3 a.m, for years. He crossed the whole room on purpose to do it. He stepped into her path as she came off the serving line with her tray. And this time, it was not a boot, and it was not a bump at the coffee urns. He drove his shoulder into her, hard, a deliberate check, the kind you throw in a fight, hard enough to stagger her sideways and slam her hip into the steel serving rail. Trays rattled all down the line. Her tray tipped, and she caught it against her chest before it went. The whole room half-turned at the crash of it. "I told you," Keegan said, loud now, all the way committed now, past the point of deniable. "Off post, before I call it in, and they drag you out of here in front of everybody." She caught herself on the rail. She set the tray down flat on the steel and squared it. 2 fingers, unhurried, exactly as she had squared it on the floor 3 days before. And then she turned, slowly, to face him. And she smiled. It was the first time in 3 days that anyone had seen her smile. And it was not a warm smile, and it was not a cruel one. It was the smile of a person who has just watched the very last door swing shut and feels, in some strange and quiet way, relieved that the waiting is finally over. She said it low, meant only for him, under the noise. Last chance to walk away, Private. He didn't. Behind him, the double doors of the dining facility swung open. Sergeant Major Isaiah Redmond came through them at a walk, and he was not alone. Beside him strode a full colonel, Aaron Petrakis, the brigade commander, 47 years old, silver coming in at the temples, a man 500 soldiers came to attention for on any ordinary day of the week. But it was not the colonel the room read first. It was Redmond. Redmond took 3 paces into the hall, and he stopped, and he came to attention. Snapped to it, hard and clean, 21 years of muscle memory firing at once, spine straight, chin level. Eyes locked across the room on the woman standing at the serving rail with a private in her face. He did not say a word yet. He did not need to say a word yet. A sergeant major with that much time on him does not brace up like that for nobody. And the soldiers nearest him read it in half a second and rose to their feet. Because that is what a body does when it sees that. And the soldiers next to those soldiers rose because they had risen. And it went out across that enormous room like a single wave, crossing open water. Table by table, row by row, 500 soldiers. On their feet, forks going down onto trays, and then the trays themselves, the ones in people's hands, the ones half lifted off the rails, stopped dead where they were, held up in the air. Because the oldest custom in any mess in any army in the world is that you do not sit and you do not eat until the senior soldier in the room is seated first. And every last enlisted man and woman in that hall had just understood, without one word of order given, that the senior soldier in the entire building was the quiet woman in plain clothes that a private had spent 3 days tripping for laughs. Silence. Total. The ice machine cycling in the back, the fans on the roof. Redmond's voice broke it, and it came out loud and clear and formal. The voice of a man finally discharging a debt he had carried on his back since the summer of 2005. Command Sergeant Major on the floor, 1 beat. Brigade Command Sergeant Major Marchetti. Colonel Petrakis came to attention at his side. Sergeant Major, he said, across the whole silent room, we've been waiting for you. And still nobody sat. Nobody ate. 500 soldiers stood there with their trays held up in the air and waited, because the custom does not answer to rank alone. It waits, specifically, for her to sit. She looked at all of it. She looked at an entire dining facility on its feet for her. Then she pulled out the chair at the nearest table, unhurried, the same unhurried she had crouched with on Monday, and she set her tray down on the table, and she squared it to the edge with 2 fingers, and she sat. Only then did the room come down. 500 soldiers sitting in one long, slow ripple, trays lowering, the collective sound of it like a tide finally going back out. Brody Keegan had not sat down. Brody Keegan could not move at all. His face ran the whole cycle, and everyone close enough to see it watched it happen in real time. First the confusion, a boy's blank incomprehension. This does not make sense. Why is everybody standing up? Then the disbelief, a small, hard shake of the head. No, she's a civilian. I saw her. She's nobody, I've been saying. Then recognition, the floor tilting all the way over, 3 whole days rearranging themselves behind his eyes into a shape that made him sick. And then, Last of all, the horror. Pure and complete and total. The full understanding of exactly what he had done, and precisely to whom, and in front of exactly how many hundreds of witnesses. The fork was still in his fist, the chicken still on it. He had never once brought it down. He opened his mouth, and what came out was the only thing left in the whole of him, small and cracked, a boy's voice in a room gone to stone. What did I miss? The answer, though not one soul in that hall said it out loud, was everything. He had missed everything. 3 full days of it, walking past him in plain clothes, eating alone in the corner, clearing a man's airway in 9 seconds, counting the exits out of a habit older than he was. Waiting. Command Sergeant Major Delia Marchetti looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and she did not raise her voice. There were no handcuffs. Understand that clearly, because it is the whole point of her. A Command Sergeant Major's reckoning is a far heavier and far quieter thing than an arrest, and she had precisely no intention of spending the United States Army's time and her own destroying a 19-year-old boy over a bad joke and a worse decision, however much the room might have enjoyed watching her do it. She had him report to her office that afternoon at 1600. She was in uniform now. The plain clothes were gone for good. The private who had tripped a lost civilian for laughs stood at parade rest in front of the senior enlisted soldier of an entire brigade and understood the true size of his mistake in his knees and the back of his neck. She did not scream. She never once, from start to finish, raised her voice above the level of ordinary speech. She laid it out for him instead, flat and exact and unhurried, the way she squared a tray to an edge. Everything he had done. The boot. The tray. The nickname and the photo. The second bump at the urns. The shove at the rail in front of witnesses. And then the false report. That one she went through slow and deliberate. Twice. Because a false official statement was not a joke, and he was going to carry the full weight of having made one against another soldier. And then what all of it would cost him. Extra duty, corrective training, a formal counseling entered permanently into his record. And then the part that landed the heaviest of all, precisely because it was not a punishment at all. You are not going anywhere, she told him, and neither am I. You will serve under me for the next 3 years, Private. So here is what that is going to mean for you. She let it sit in the air a moment. You don't get to be the private who humiliated a sergeant major. That is not a thing I am going to let you be. By the time I am finished with you, you will not remember me as the woman you tripped in a chow hall. You will remember me as the exact reason you turned into a soldier worth the uniform. That is the deal. You do not get the story you wanted. You get to be the one good thing I make out of the worst thing you ever did. Do you understand me, Private Keegan? He did. He said so. His voice cracked in half on it. She held his eyes 1 beat longer, and then she let him go. At the door, he stopped. He turned back, and for the first time all week, there was nothing performed in his face at all. Just a boy who had run out of the story he'd been telling, and did not know what to put in its place. Sergeant Major, he said, the soldier. Monday, the one who choked. He swallowed. That was going to be a dead man if you hadn't been there, wasn't it? Yes, she said. And I spent the next 2 days calling you a name in a group chat. Yes, she said again. She did not soften it, and she did not sharpen it. She let it be the exact size it was. Now you know the cost of guessing at people, Private. Carry it. Don't set it down. Dismissed. He went. And she believed, watching the door close behind him, that he might actually turn out to be worth the trouble. Most of them were, in the end, if someone was willing to spend the patience on them that no one had spent on Keegan yet. That was the job, too. The unglamorous heart of the whole job. Then she called in the other one. Specialist Mateo Quill came to attention in front of her desk, with no earthly idea why he had been summoned, braced for something, and she let him stand in it for a second before she spoke. "You write at a napkin dispenser," she said. "Wednesday. You set a fork straight that wasn't even yours. You told a man twice as loud as you were to leave it alone, and you took the laughing for it." She looked at him. "You did all of that when you were certain nobody was watching you do it. Here is a thing you should learn early and keep. There is always someone watching, specialist. Always. But that is not why you did it, and that is exactly why it matters. You did it because it was the right thing to do, at the precise moment doing. It was inconvenient, and cost you something. That is the job. That is the entire job, from the first day to the last." She signed a recommendation while he stood there, the leadership development course, her own name on the endorsement line, which on that post meant a door swinging open that did not swing open twice for anyone. "Courtesy when no one is watching," she said, and held the paper across the desk to him. "Carry that further than I ever got to. Dismissed. Specialist." Here is the thing this channel keeps circling back to, and it is just as true here as it has ever been anywhere. The patient ones are the most dangerous ones in any room, and the people truly worth following are the ones who could burn the whole thing to the ground and choose instead to build something out of it. She could have ended Brody Keegan with a sentence and been within her rights. She chose to make him instead. If that lands anywhere in you, do one small thing for all the soldiers whose stories never get told at all. Subscribe to Honor Tales and help the quiet ones finally get heard. That evening, she sat alone in her new office with the whole base gone quiet outside the window and the light going long and gold across the desk. On the desk sat Delacroix's coin, where she always set it, squared to the edge. And beside it, tonight, sat a second coin. Worn. Older even than his. One she had not placed there. She picked it up slowly. She knew the exact weight of every coin she owned, every one, and this was not one of them. On the face, a unit crest she knew at a glance, and on the back, scratched by hand into the soft metal with the point of a knife, a short line of letters and a small grid of numbers. A coded greeting that only 2 living people in the whole world would ever use, and a set of coordinates she could read in half a second without thinking. The Horn of Africa. The letters spelled a name she had buried, a name that belonged to a man she had been told, with total certainty, in a sealed briefing 11 years ago, had died in that exact theater. A man whose coin should not exist at all, sitting on a desk it had no way to have reached, in a building she herself had walked into for the very first time that same afternoon. She turned the coin over to the light, and for the first time in 21 years, 21 years of counting every single step, of squaring every edge she ever touched, of always, always knowing precisely who she had outlasted and exactly who she had lost, and where the line between them ran. Command. Sergeant Major Delia Marchetti was not at all sure who she had just outlasted. She set the new coin down beside Delacroix's, and she squared them both to the edge of the desk with 2 fingers, side by side, the lost and the impossible. 2 coins. 2 men she had counted, once, as settled accounts. She sat with them a long time as the gold light went out of the window and the base wound down for the night. Somewhere out there, a 19-year-old private was lying awake again, for a better reason this time. Somewhere, a specialist was reading an endorsement with his name on it, and reading it twice. And here, at a bare new desk in a building she'd walked into that very morning, the senior soldier of a brigade turned a dead man's coin over and over in her steady hands. Some debts, it turns out, do not stay buried where you put them. Some names come walking back on the far side of the whole world, with a coin and a grid and a greeting, and they ask quietly to be answered. But that is a story for another night. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.